Hello, so if there's already someone watching, please let me know in the chat just on YouTube. If you're a patron who's donating more than $20 a month, you should see, if you go to Patreon now, a post with the link to join as a caller. If that doesn't work, please also let me know in the YouTube chat. Hello, Jesse, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hello.
Oh, perfect, nice to hear you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. It's 12:30 in the morning here.
Where's that?
That's Australia.
Okay, nice. I'm surprised by how good the audio quality is. That's really amazing.
Yeah, I have half of the country's internet on hold right now.
Perfect. Let's just wait
Am I
for
the
some more.
first one here?
Yeah, let's just wait for some more people to join in. I mean, technically it only starts in a minute. I hope that everyone will find the link.
Mm-hmm.
You just get notifications immediately once I post something on Patreon, right?
Yeah, I get an email as well.
Jesse, maybe can you let me know about the audio and video quality for you?
Audio quality is fine. Video quality has just reduced for me, but again, it might just be my internet connection.
Okay, cool, thank you. Well, since it's 4:30, we could already start. There's Inge in the chat. So just there's not too much silence in the beginning. If you already have a question, just go ahead. Or if you have some topic to talk about.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Back in 2013, when you first launched your original concept of Citybound, I think it was a YouTube video.
Yeah.
It was focused around the concept of a procedural architectural model for the entire city, that buildings wouldn't be collected from a library of sprites, but they would be procedural.
Yes.
And that was always the concept that grabbed me about Citybound. And I feel like over the last 3 or 4 years, with talk about transport engines and economic engines, that concept has fallen by the wayside. Have you maintained that idea, or have you developed that model at all since then?
Yes, sure. Like it's still a very high priority for me to do buildings like that. It's just not a topic that is immediately important for me to like make sure all the core gameplay is covered and works. But it's one of the things that I want to pursue as the first after that, because it is one of the main influences of how Citybound will look. And regarding progress on how I would implement that, I have a pretty clear picture of some aspects of it. There's lots of great work papers about procedural architecture, which you can just use as they are pretty much. Actually, one contributor, I had a nice discussion with him, I don't recall his name right now, in the Gitter chat, suggested an idea that helped me with one aspect that I really wasn't sure about. In particular, that is for how to position, let's say, different parts of a building into a potentially oddly shaped lot. And he had an idea based on skeletons of the building, where you can imagine like the main wing of a building being like the spine, and then all the other wings of the building are like arms and legs, and it uses some kind of physical simulation to kind of wiggle itself into the available lot. And just based on how he described it, I think this can work really well. Just as an example.
And you don't necessarily have to have one building per lot, but you could have several. Even in architectural even in small residential situations, you could have your main house and a garage off to the side and a shed at the back of the garden and that sort of thing. Yeah,
sure. And this technique would even allow for 3-dimensional structures where you have two kind of independent buildings, but they're connected by like an, I don't know how that's called in English, like I guess some kind of archway, like where the second floors are connected or something like that. So
oh yeah, like a bridge sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you can go really far with that, and I'm really looking forward to explore and try all of that.
And how do you think that might work for your classic civic buildings like schools or police stations or ports or whatever?
In which sense? Like how it influences their behavior?
How would you, if you have an entire city of modular buildings and procedural buildings, how do you make your police stations procedural? Is it the same system?
Yes, sure. It would just be exactly the same as for any kind of residential buildings, and it could actually like take into account, for example, how much budget you give police in general, or maybe even this police station in general, and plan not just some kind of abstract, or like, you know how in other city building games you have these concrete steps of progress for civic buildings, but you could actually
have one and you have your large one sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But you could actually have something like an existing school which now can maybe afford like this extension building wing, which is something which you see all the time in real life, I think. And yeah, so these kind of civic buildings or infrastructure buildings could also grow much more organically.
Another concept I had was that if you have a police station in a town and you build it in say on a main street, that it could renovate an existing building without having to knock it down and rebuild it.
Yeah, this is another important idea that basically interacts with zoning and how buildings are used. And there my plan was also to not make building usage tied to exactly the kind of building, but that a building can potentially host a lot of different activities, and basically maybe it needs to be remodeled or renovated, like you said, but it could allow for reuse. I mean, you often see this with old industrial buildings, I think, at least as far as I'm aware of.
Absolutely. Yeah, urban renewal all the time.
Yes.
Something that I've come across from my loose research into cities is that when they first start building, however long a time ago it is, land is cheap, obviously. And so the first buildings in a city often acquire huge swaths of land when it's a more agricultural region. And then we'll slowly build out that land or subdivide it as it becomes more and more valuable. So for example, a school that's in the middle of a rural town will have a huge plot of land, and then as that town becomes more urbanized, it will develop buildings inside of that plot of land rather than buying land from nearby.
Yeah. And I think I at least know this from the example of Berlin, where you have pretty large blocks with huge yards, but which are now completely filled like with additional buildings that weren't planned initially, just because this was the only precious land left.
Yeah, so I guess that means that when you're building a school, you'd just zone an area with a paintbrush instead of plopping a building.
Exactly, yeah, that's the idea. Inge is writing in chat that she doesn't really want buildings to just remodel themselves automatically, but they should ask for permission or something like that. I think that can be dependent on zoning. Again, like if the building wants to become or wants to be used for a different kind of activity, as long as that agrees with the zoning that you suggested, I think it can just happen automatically. But something that I was thinking about, like regardless of reusing buildings or building new buildings, could be that like a company could tell you as a player, like, look, here's a really attractive place for me, but you're not currently zoning this as the kind of zone that I need to build it there. Like, have you considered that?
Well, have you thought about how modding might work with that sort of an architectural system? how might someone make a mod for a school or like a new residential house or something?
In general, regarding just the architecture, my plan is to basically write a kind of specialized language just to describe an architectural style. Again, this ties in very closely with the papers which I saw, where even myself, I would have to author these procedural buildings using some basic operations of geometry. And I would just completely make that, yeah?
Sorry, no, you go on.
Yeah, and my plan is just to completely make all of these rule sets and combining these rules available to modders in the ideal case, but this will take some time, of course, in a kind of graphical tool. There is I forgot the name, I think it's called CityGen or something like that, like a city generator software which people use as CGI for movies, where you can like create huge cities, either current time or from ancient times, and they have a pretty neat interface to very quickly author a lot of different styles of buildings, which you can then use to create like tens of thousands of buildings for a city. And I have something very similar in mind. So yeah, that would be completely available to modders. And apart from like the visual rule set and description, you could actually say like, okay, this building consists of like a ground floor for shops, higher floors residential or other usage, and you could just create and share these rule sets as mods.
Well, rather than defining what zones different parts of a building can be used for, it could simply be what use cases it is. So this is public space, this is private space, this is claustrophobic space, and that would define what wealth levels could fit and what use cases the building could be applied to.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I guess that in a way that's kind of like an architectural template that you'd be defining.
Exactly.
Make this style with these permutations acceptable.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward just how expressive this is, and I think if it works well, then this can really deliver on this promise that every building will be individual, but still like a city might have a consistent style or look depending on like the culture or region or whatever.
So because I think that's the real holy grail of a perfect city sim game, is that a city looks different every time and it looks like a real city rather than 15 of the same building in a row.
Exactly. And kind of the slogan which I have for myself to set the ambition for the graphical style, including, for example, the procedural architecture, is just that any kind of screen that you could see of the game should be printable as a poster because it looks so nice, like some kind of aerial picture of a city.
Yeah.
So, and I think with procedural buildings, if they are implemented well, I can get there. Yeah. Let's see what Inge has to say. Yeah, she's talking about actually smaller buildings upgrading or being demolished in favor of bigger buildings, and that a city might have the incentive to actually protect smaller buildings. This is something pretty important in Germany, and I guess everywhere, that you can mark a building as historical, and then you can't demolish it at all. Or, yeah.
In the SimCity 4 expansion pack, Rush Hour, that feature was included in the game. You could declare,
yeah, I also remember that.
Yeah, a building historical, and then it would never be replaced. It'd be nice, in addition to being able to select individual buildings, to basically paint whole regions with a paintbrush. Or even to say, that tree is historical, or that shed is historical, and watch future buildings try and build around a tree.
Yeah. Interesting how fine-grained it can be or could become.
Yeah, I mean, say I make this tree historical, then that could be a feature to a future building, and so it might want to make that a central point of the building.
Yeah, this is starting, like now I'm starting to require AI for the architecture, but
and I guess modders, on top of making architectural styles, they could make libraries of architectural assets that the styles could call upon.
Exactly.
So
like the smallest elements of like windows, columns, I don't know, roof tiles or whatever are the classical kind of asset.
And I guess the base game styles could simply say, call upon any roof tile for this bit or any roof tile for that bit, and then when people start getting mods, they can specify which styles get access to which assets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. That's already
Returning.
very detailed and interesting discussion about one topic. Since there's no one else joined yet, what else are you interested in?
Yeah, well, returning to civic buildings like schools and stuff. I think I proposed this on Simtropolis back in 2014, and you had a good look at it, and I think you said yes at the time, was essentially taking the concept of funding and applying it to what would be a procedurally generated zoned area, and came up with the concept of grants. So if you have a
Yeah.
school that has this block of land, it knows how many students it's receiving, and it knows like the quality of the facilities that it's offering. And rather than relying on you to come in and plop down the latest basketball court or playground or whatever, like you did in the new SimCity with the little modules, it would come to you and tell you what it wants money for, and you would give it to it.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't recall that in that much detail. I definitely wanted to avoid the kind of micromanagement of having to decide to give them a basketball court. I wanted a lot of that to be automated, that just based on the budget that you allot, they do such stuff automatically. But again, like this would be similar maybe to the company telling you, hey, don't you want to put this zone here? It would be the school telling you, look, you're only budgeting us so much now. If you gave us some more, we could build this, for example.
Well, that would be on a school-by-school basis, and I guess you could make your citywide schooling budget the culmination of all of your individual schooling budgets. But what if instead you just set a citywide schooling budget, and the city tried to figure out how to divvy that up among all of the schools? And so if you're being very stingy, you would lower that budget. And so the city would only approve the really critical schooling upgrades, and so you wouldn't get basketball courts, you'd just get classrooms. But if you gave it basically an unlimited budget, then every school will build every facility. And that's something you could do in a sandbox mode. And
yeah,
of course, if you wanted the basketball court in a particular spot, that's when you can step in and foot the bill for it. And that's basically what you see in real life with governments coming in with grants to schools and funding, whole projects just because they want to. And so that all then gets a real connection to it.
Yeah, that would definitely make sense. And I think it's really interesting to explore different kinds of gameplay possibilities between automation and micromanagement for the player there.
And I guess similar systems could be applied at a corporate level, because while you may have a state-owned shipping port, it's more likely that that shipping port is instead owned by a corporation and is investing their profits in a similar way.
Exactly. Yeah, privately held infrastructure is also a really interesting point. Just because Inge is asking now, I think she doesn't even see your name when you're speaking, just your thumbnail. So Inge, this is Jesse.
Hi, Inge. I don't actually see the chat. Where can I find the chat?
You actually have to open the stream on YouTube, and there you see the chat. I mean, you just have the Google Hangouts window open now, right?
Yeah. I don't even see it on YouTube right now either.
Because you need, do you have the link? I posted it on Patreon yesterday.
I may not. I'll look for that.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to try out this Hangouts on Air feature, it's called, but I realize now that having the chat so disconnected from our call is maybe not the best thing. And maybe next time I will instead just create a regular Hangout and put it on my screen and then do a regular like screencast. But yeah, this is what we're experimenting with. And it will also be interesting to see how well the quality of the recorded video will be. Okay, perfect.
Okay. Thinking
cool.
instead about something that might happen a bit sooner. The UI around your like transport engine with roads and laneways and stuff.
Yeah.
I was thinking probably the best way to present those laneways would be like a road interface with all the different lane types available, your one-lane road, your parking on the side, your tree-lined bit, your whatever, and simply dragging them into a unit of road where you have your pedestrian side path and your line of trees and your line of parking for cars and your 2 lanes of road and then your hard shoulder in the middle. And then you could drag that entire piece as a large unit around the city. And
as
you
a
could
kind of
save...
road style, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So where in other city sims you would have your 3-lane road and your 2-lane road and you just drag it as a piece rather than needing to drag all 5 or 6 lanes, because any complicated enough road would have 5 lanes. What I just described was really a 2-lane road, but it has 5 or 6 lanes of detail on it with pedestrian footpaths and stuff.
That's a good point. I think I didn't think about this in detail, but what might be a nice metaphor is what Adobe programs do, for example, that you can select one element and copy its style and apply it to another element. That would be kind of what you described, I think. The way I imagine it was actually to just maybe you have different swatches for different individual lanes that you might add to an existing road, and then just make it really easy to copy and paste the road to be parallel. But after you described it, I think it seems really necessary that you can just take the style of this road in a plan and apply it to a completely different already existing road.
Yeah, and that would allow people to share styles. Or save a style from one city and apply it to another city. Because, I mean, I want my particular 2-lane road with a bus lane and, you know, a fat pedestrian sidewalk. I want that all the way across my city. I don't want to recreate it every time I start a new city block.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of something, going back to zoning a little bit. I was thinking that in SimCity, and as far as I'm aware, also City Skylines, you have this very classical residential, commercial, industrial kind of zoning.
Yeah, absolutely.
In reality, it's of course much more complicated. Then in Japan, you have a completely different kind of zoning system, which is also really interesting. And I was thinking about making the zoning and the mapping to which buildings are possible. They're very customizable, so that you could actually, in your city, create your own style of zoning. Like, so choose which kind of zones you want to have, what is possible there, and then again share that with others. So if you have road styles, that would be another kind of shareable style of something.
Yeah, and I mean other games like SimCity 4 or City Skylines, they have ordinances or council legislation that you can set, say no tall buildings or whatever, but that's not ever really specific, because that's just ruling out which types of buildings, or what types of sprites are able to show up in the game. But I guess if you're making everything procedural, then you can exactly define what it is. No buildings above 15 meters here or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
So when the economic system is complete, which would essentially mean that you have close to a working prototype of the game, what would be the first features you would add to that?
If we assume that like I would say like 3 main points of traffic, economy, and zoning work, which would be the core of the game as you just described, probably the first thing that I want to add is actually pedestrians, which would be the first example of different kinds of transport.
So, I mean, you would already have those agents working in the system, but you're talking about visualizing them in that way?
No, I mean, like right now, the only way of transport is by car in the prototype. Like there are no pedestrians.
Right.
And thus, like all the considerations of transport, all the considerations of location choice, both for families as well as businesses, center around the like reachability by car.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
All kinds of transports are really important for me, and the effect that choosing a kind of transport has, not just on each day, but on, like I said, location choices. And pedestrians is just the first other example which I want to try, basically because it's also the most different from the other ones. Like the cars right now work pretty much like tiny trains going along roads. So adding something like actual trains or trams or subway or even buses is not that different to that and should be quite easy. Whereas pedestrians are in a way much more free roaming, where they can actually walk into two-dimensional spaces like a square, or there can even be, like I described early in the example of Berlin, these backyard buildings which you can't even reach by car. And then, of course, the connection between pedestrians and cars are parking lots, which is something that has been completely ignored by city building games so far, but is also really important.
I mean, SimCity 4 back in 2003, you have to give it a bit of leeway here because it was working with much greater technology than it was available with at the time, but like cars would pull up at a building and would just vanish from the road.
Yes.
Both SimCity 2013 and City Skylines tried to make something that looked a little bit better. Like they had cars that would pull in from the curb out of an imaginary spot inside the building.
But, of course, but still, that's just an animation and doesn't consider the fact how much space there is available, or that you might actually need to park away really far from the building and then walk somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd like to see a car that can pull off the road and actually drive to a spot in a car park and park there. Or how at the end of a big sporting game, you'll have a huge car park empty, and so you'll get congestion even just getting out of the car park, yet alone the car park leading onto the road.
Exactly.
And if everything's procedural, then that shouldn't be too hard at all, because you can just define car parking as an architectural style.
Exactly.
You're using these uniform car park blocks with spacing between them in these certain ways to create rows of car park, and it can be whatever you want.
Exactly. So Inge says that in City Skylines, most of the traffic is just cosmetic. Yeah, and she also wants cars to have to find a parking space. Yeah. I mean, maybe to shift the topic a little bit, I think like one of the biggest problems or topics that a lot of people have raised awareness for, which scares me the most about implementing Citybound, is actually the topic of microscopic traffic combined with time speed up and the distances that you have in a city, because both the new SimCity and Skylines avoid this problem by just teleporting cars if something doesn't work out. But
I think with Skylines, I'm not sure whether it's teleporting them to their destination or teleporting them back to their original location. But yeah, they definitely do teleport when things stuff up, because it's a way of forgiving players that are screwing up. Because if you have a traffic jam that takes like 5 months to get through, and I've had this problem in my cities all the time. I have a traffic jam that is blocked up from my city entrance all the way to, for example, my power plant.
Yeah.
And I have trucks of coal sitting in that traffic jam. And my power plant needs coal because it's run out of coal. I don't want my entire city to shut down because the power plant shut down because the truck couldn't get to the coal power plant on time because I'm a bad city planner.
Yeah.
That would mean death to the whole city because of one silly mistake. And so it's very forgiving to players that if it's stuck in traffic for that long, then it will just help me out and not destroy my city's logistics.
Exactly. And the problem is that it's not just that you made maybe a small mistake in the infrastructure, but that the time speed up, and like some people that did the calculations in a lot of detail, amplifies such things horribly. Like you said, this truck is actually standing in a traffic jam for months. And I'm not quite sure how I will solve that yet. I'm trying to help it a little bit by making the factors involved more forgiving, like that an in-game day is actually longer, for example, or that I pretty much ignore whatever happens at night. Like maybe there's like 3 hours of nightlife, but I mostly focus on the day. I don't focus on the times where people just sit at work and don't do anything, so that the traffic has as much time in the time scale as possible to breathe. But still, like there will be unrealistic things happening because of that. But I think this is just something that has to be experimented with.
Yeah. Well, then there's also the challenge of, how many hours go into a day, how many days go into 1 year. because you want to properly reflect seasons, and you want large-scale projects to be completed in a time scale that isn't, days of game time. But you also don't want someone to take 6 months to drive to work.
Yeah, and there you talk about a very related problem, but which feels much less threatening for me, just because it feels for me as if the different levels of timescales don't really interact. I think it can be quite okay if a huge high-rise building builds within 2 days, in-game days, for example, or if large infrastructure projects like an airport finish within 4 days, and then a year could just consist of 4 or 8 days separated over the seasons, and that would be fine.
In real life, that airport wouldn't be completed in a year. That airport would be completed in 7 or 8 years. There's currently a big transport project going on here in Melbourne, in Australia. It's like a big subway connection straight through the center of the city. That's an 11-year project, and they've only just started.
Yeah, and if you did that, it would yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot more leeway to be unrealistic with such stuff, just because it's more interesting to see the result of something on your city faster.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm so glad you implemented the planning modules into the game that let someone spend their hours designing a complicated intersection or whatever that might take in-game years to build. But you don't have to, like in old SimCity time, you had to build the whole thing, wait for it to build, try it out. It didn't work, demolish it, try it again. Whereas with the simulation,
in the meantime,
you can
speed up the simulation, stop it, and shift speeds all the time, right?
Yeah.
Actually,
whereas with the planning tool, you could simulate the traffic, because heck, the whole game is already a simulation. You can tell the planning tool, simulate traffic through this intersection, and like we currently have with the prototype, you can just send maximum traffic in every direction, and you can see how it reacts and fix it like that, and then save it as like a blueprint. And when you finally get around to needing it or having the budget to pay for it, you can drop that cache and it will start building in the background.
Yeah, exactly. I think the planning mode is one of the liberating features of Citybound in many ways. Let's quickly see what Inge has to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we don't have to cut the construction times completely short, like the other city building games do it, but we can actually use the fact that the player can plan something new while other stuff is already building. To actually have some realistic building timescales. And I mean, this is completely a guess and just how I think about it intuitively, but I think it can have this quite nice feeling of constantly changing city that you tend to almost like a garden while you're in parallel planning the next steps. Or at least this is the kind of feeling that I would like it to have.
Well, I kind of envisage a possibility, and this certainly isn't the only option, but it's one option I've thought of, was basically only have 2 time settings. You have real time, where cars will actually get stuck at an intersection for 2 minutes before moving on, and people will walk to the cafe for lunch and that sort of thing. And everything happens in a real time scale, which is much slower than even the slow speed in most games. And that's for enjoying your city and taking in the view. And you'd see that when you're doing planning view and whatever. And ultimately, a lot of macro simulation can be forgotten about when you're doing that, because all the individual's concerned about is the next 5 hours of their work, because it's going to take them 5 hours. And then the second time scale would be like African swallow speed, where you can build a 5-year project in a minute, where traffic may just be a blur to save on graphic rendering, like your classic time-lapse photo at night where they're just streaks of light.
Okay. Interesting, because
so that does mean it's an interesting concept that tries to maintain both the real and fake timescales.
That's an interesting suggestion, because my plan was to just have a speed in between where you can like, everything is kind of quick, but you can still make out these individual interactions. And I definitely see the need for a realistic timescale to just like actually watch things in actual speed and enjoy them. The African swallow speed, I'm not sure if it's possible. Like I would have to basically invent a completely abstracted way of doing traffic for that.
Yeah, that would break the computer. I can see that happening.
And not because of graphics, but just because of actually doing the simulation. So
Yeah,
that's
this
why
is a game where
I think
simulation is harder.
this is why I think, or this could be mitigated exactly by like overlaying the long-term stuff on top of the like not real time but quite slow daily processes. Inge says that it's most important to her that it takes 1 hour of game time to make a journey that would take 1 hour in life, but I think that's too extreme. Like I don't think we have time for that because otherwise, and the reason for that is that you need to be able to iterate on your infrastructure design, because if it takes 24 hours of real time for your citizens to do their day, then it means that you can only learn something about like the problems they're experiencing with getting to work, for example, after a day.
And who has 24 hours in a day to play a game?
Exactly.
So instead, you don't necessarily see the clock in game ticking away at the same speed that you have the real clock ticking away in game. You might have a day that takes, let's say, 6 minutes or 10 minutes in real life. And so perhaps the clock is ticking by a lot faster. Maybe it's ticking by, a minute every second.
Yeah, that's roughly the
So it
speed
does an
that
hour
I had
every
in
minute,
mind.
and so it's 24 minutes to a day. Even I feel like that's probably still too slow, but it could be something
This is
like
roughly
that.
what I was aiming for, like 20-24 minutes per day. But yeah, like you said, it might turn out that this is even too slow to kind of appreciate the patterns of traffic, for example.
But I mean, I would like a timescale that is real time, because then you can have a car that sits at an intersection for an extremely long amount of time, and then it only takes that car half an hour to get to work, as it should.
Yes, I definitely see the need for this timescale, and this is not a problem at all. And I think using this from time to time could actually contribute greatly to the atmosphere of the game, maybe because you could actually like sit in different places of your city and experience it at the time scale of your citizens.
I feel like The Sims works well with 1 minute to 1 second, because The Sims has a very dynamic speed change. Like I can slow down to 1 time speed in The Sims as often as I feel like to do all of the measly micromanagement, but as soon as I've done all that, I put it to ×3 speed and race Sims through their day, and therefore each day usually ends up lasting about 3-4 minutes for me. But I'm not sure how the simulation in Citybound would be able to cope with something like that.
Yeah, and the way I imagine it is that you will actually be busy enough with new plans while the other stuff is still building. So again, I don't think you have this moment where you're done with your plan, you start implementing it, and you don't know what to do next. You can basically just watch it, and then of course you want to speed it up. But maybe I could even say that it's my goal to avoid that.
Well, perhaps to appease, you might have it so that if you're tailgating a car or spectating one individual object or whatever, then it does everything in real time. And it would take this car a real life 1 hour to get to work. And as soon as you stop looking at it, then it does the journey in 10 minutes.
Okay, that
so all the other cars got to
complicated.
work in 10 minutes, but this one car took an hour.
Like it's the troll and individual citizen feature.
Yeah.
I just saw someone randomly join in and immediately leave again. I don't know what that was
so did
about.
I.
Well, let's
It's
see.
not like they got the wrong call.
Yeah. but let's see, now as we're like moving into the second slot of availability, someone else might join. But I have to say, like, I didn't expect, but this is also largely thanks to you, that just the two-person conversation with the third person in chat would carry on that well.
Well, you've seen me enough in chat Q&As to know that I have plenty of questions to ask.
Sure. One other thing that might be interesting for discussion, even though it's something for the far future maybe, is that planning mode makes collaboration in one city possible, which is something which I have been working on really hard in the engine to make possible. But I didn't think a lot yet about how the gameplay might actually turn out. But just everything that I can imagine sounds really exciting, of having like a shared server where you build the city together, or you might even decide to specialize on different parts or aspects of the city.
Well, that was something I was going to say, that, I mean, by the time, at the rate that we've been going so far, where it's been, what, about 4 years to make a simple prototype. And
yeah,
I mean, it doesn't help that you moved country about, what, 4 times in that time?
Sure.
Yeah. But I mean, how long is it going to be before this project is finished? Another 3, another 4 years, perhaps?
Probably, yeah.
And because stuff like AMD Ryzen and Intel's new i9 series are probably going to be mainstream by that point, we can make reasonable assumptions that most people would have like an 8-core CPU by that stage, or 16 threads in their computers. And so that could be minimum spec. And anyone who actually wants to play this game will need to chip in to buy a computer that's that powerful.
Why do you bring it up?
Oh, just my heart was crushed to see how SimCity was cannibalized from the inside out because of their target to be able to run on the lowest end systems around at the time, because it was EA trying to hit the lowest common denominator, which was a 1-core or 2-core CPU. And it was very clear from early gameplay footage and early trailers that the game was going to be everything they promised it to be: every citizen individually modeled, and traffic properly modeled, and agents doing all of this and that and the other. And then the final game comes out, and the city tile is 2 kilometers squared, and traffic is half simulated, and people choose the closest place to go to work because it simplified the game, because it meant the game was capable of running on such a low-end system.
And I talked with one of the ex-developers on Twitter, and he actually confirmed that this was exactly the reason, that they could have had bigger tiles, but just because they, or management, chose to have such a tiny minimum spec which they have to build for, they couldn't do anything bigger. And yeah, to maybe talk about that for Citybound, like, I'm not just writing it for anyone with a good computer, like making use of all the cores and so on, but in a way I'm almost writing it so it can actually run in the cloud. Like, we also, funnily enough, had this promise for SimCity where they said the simulation is so intensive that it needs the cloud, when actually that was just for DRM. But I was thinking,
I so wish that they had actually used the cloud in that simulation, because that again would have fixed all of their problems. Even if they'd had a monthly subscription, I would have paid that monthly subscription to get a good, the city sim that they promised they were going to deliver.
So this is actually my kind of end vision, to have Citybound running on a couple of servers which you can rent out, and like they support a huge scale city, and your computer has to only be able, in a sense, to stream whatever part you're currently looking at.
Well,
yeah,
I'd kind of see 2 products available. I might see, say, like the casual level product, which is, you know, the average retail version. If this thing were ever to hit a brick and mortar store, that's the sort of thing that would be sold there. And it would have limitations on city tiles, and it might be something like SimCity 4, where the tiles are immediately adjacent to each other, so you can build one city that feeds into the other. But the simulation is contained within a small area, and that makes it capable of running on even a high-end computer, say like a 6-core computer. But it still has most of the simulation features. And then you can sell your baller product, which yeah, could be a server-based thing, and perhaps you're renting a server, perhaps you're installing it on a server you already have, but that has much more extreme hardware conditions and lets you run, a full city at once of whatever size you want with all of the features, dynamic weather, and everything.
Yeah, but I'm not a fan of this kind of beforehand restrictions at all. Like, first there will probably be never be a brick and mortar store version of Citybound, just because there will probably not be brick and mortar stores anymore for games. But even then, like, why not just test the limits of whatever system you have and make the biggest city that you can? And if you make it bigger, it will just become slow.
Yeah. Okay. And have enough settings that you can turn off whatever things are slowing down the game. So you can turn off your dynamic weather, and you can turn off your accurate traffic modeling and whatever.
Exactly. And then if I build this for the cloud, it should of course also work in a local LAN. So if you have 2 laptops, you can already have a city that's twice as big, like in a pretty obvious way.
Of course, the danger to think about when dealing with cloud computing is that you want your servers to be geographically quite close to your player base.
Yes.
Yeah.
The difference in ping is quite a problem for the simulation.
Yeah. It's not as bad as something like Rocket League or League of Legends, but it would still be pretty bad if I hit play and it takes half a second before the city actually starts.
Yeah. The more interesting thing is actually like what happens, for example, to a car as it crosses from one machine to the next, and it actually like to make this 1 meter, it actually takes it like 1 in-game hour just because of the ping between the 2 machines. But like, these are the detailed problems. The important part is that in general, the way I'm building the engine is that this kind of stuff will be supported out of the box. And interestingly, it's the same implementation will it will support multi-core and multi-machine for the same reason, basically.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah, but now we got into something pretty technical, I guess. I don't know, maybe Inge, do you have a completely different topic that you would like us to talk about? That's nice, but not helpful. So you actually, Jesse, followed, and I'm not quite sure about Inge, but I also think so. You actually followed Citybound from the very beginning.
Yeah, I think I found about your original video about a week after you published it, and I subscribed immediately. And so
interesting. Okay, interesting that you say original video, because I think it took me at least a month to start making videos. Like, the initial announcement was actually just a blog post which I put in the SimCity subreddit.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't use Reddit, so I don't see stuff like that.
Okay, actually,
the Citybound subreddit is one of the few that I occasionally look at, and is the reason why I have a Reddit account in the first place, because I needed one to be able to comment there.
Okay, yeah, because I wanted to ask you then, and I'm not sure if this is like a good opportunity to ask, but why not, how your experience has been as someone, like you say, you go there from time to time, but I feel as if in my interaction, I now focus pretty much on the subreddit, whereas I don't frequent the Simtropolis forums at all anymore, just because it feels as if they have died down.
Yeah, they've probably have died down with the death of SimCity 4. That was really a big SimCity 4 community that struggled to stay relevant with the City Skylines era, where mods don't need a third-party website to be able to be shared.
Yeah. And apart from that, there's only one really weird and interesting community for Citybound, which is in the Something Awful forums, where someone started a thread about it, and I only found out about it because I saw that like quite a lot of traffic was coming from there to my page. And then I went there, and it looked like the super old forum, and I had to pay to even see the thread, like to create an account. But just out of curiosity, I decided to do that. And interestingly, like, there's not that many people, and not that many reactions as on Reddit, but there's very in-depth discussions. There's a couple people who are super interested in specialized topic. Like there's, for example, the parking space guy who writes like half-page posts about how these should be modeled and how important it is. And
yeah,
I like to go there from time to time to get really inspired on a very detailed level about some things.
That's cool. Yeah, Inge is one of the original ones too.
Definitely, yeah. I can't describe, and I don't know if you can imagine this, how nice it is to just recognize all of these different names of people who I know. Like I just remember in the back of my head that they've been following me for a really long time. So I don't know, I planned to do this for an hour since no one else joined the call, and I think it was obviously also a mistake to announce it on that short notice and to plan it on that short notice. Next time I will maybe even leave like a week of room ahead of it so people can maybe also make space.
Yeah, that'd probably be good. I imagine the reason why you had like one group of people say one time slot and then another group of people say the following time slot and very little overlap between the two is that this time slot we're currently in now, which is currently like 1:30 in the morning for me, is early morning for America. I think like West Coast is currently 8 o'clock in the morning or 8:30. So that's like them getting up for an early morning to watch a live stream, whereas for the Asia Pacific areas, it's like tuning in at 1 in the morning, midnight to watch. So there's some people that might be barely able to hang on late at night, and there's other people who are having to wake up super early to catch.
Yeah, and the only solution that I can see for that is to maybe rotate time slots a little bit to give everyone a chance.
Yeah, maybe.
And,
because kind of have those three regions across the world, the Americas, Europe, and Pacific, and you can make two of them happy, and then the third will be asleep.
Yeah, exactly. And England is making a great point about making it regular and making it a habit. So I think what I would like to aim for is to actually do these on a bi-weekly basis, like every 2 weeks. And I think I will just start planning the next one immediately after finishing this one. And I think this would be a pretty good rhythm. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, I think this one's worked pretty well. And if you give more people more notice, then in the next call, you might end up with a one-on-one with someone else, and we can have an entirely different conversation.
Yeah, it's true. Cool. So maybe for the last like 10 minutes, and I think an hour is also pretty good duration for that.
Yeah.
What would you like me to know what I can improve about pretty much anything that I do, like about the development, about my communication? Like there's lots of things which I'm aware of that I'm trying to improve. But like there might be things which I'm completely unaware of.
Well, one of the things I've seen over the last 4 years is you've definitely tried a lot of different ways of communicating stuff. You tried doing weekly show-off videos of stuff, and you dropped that because it was putting too much of a pressure on you to generate something headline-worthy every single week. You tried doing, I think, monthly or even yearly, like year-in review videos. I'm seeing here in the YouTube recommendations the 2014 year-in review video. Yeah. You've tried doing monthly blog posts on your website, and you've tried doing, I think, weekly or fortnightly updates. You tried doing daily updates when you first started Patreon. As far as communication goes, I think just selling into whatever rhythm works well for you and letting us know whenever you make a breakthrough is probably good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of both Inge and you are raising the same point, that the main problem with it is that it's inconsistent. One thing that I've noticed is that working on it can be very different from time to time. So actually, like in the period after I announced Patreon, it was possible to do daily updates just because there was something to tell about daily. Then again was a phase of where not really much happened. And what I would really like to find for myself is just a rhythm that's not too fast, not too slow, but just kind of steady. But yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
That's fine. I'd pretty much said everything I wanted to say about that. That I think that the recent like timesheet idea that you've had is a very good way of Patreon people who, you know, are technically paying the bills, who are wanting to see where their money's going, is a very good way for them to find out as much as they want to know without you needing to tell us and report to us every however long. And you can let us know whenever you make a breakthrough, which is ultimately what we want to hear.
Cool. That's very helpful to hear. And I think because Inge is telling me that I should be more realistic, but what I noticed about this conversation is that it needed almost no preparation compared to live streams. I didn't need to worry about if I have something or not, because there's infinitely many things in Cityborn that I think I could talk about, and infinitely many more that you are
and
probably curious about.
Develops, it'll become less about prospective concepts in the game and more about looking at the game and giving feedback on what's right and what's wrong. Yeah. I mean,
actually,
I remember you did a paper for university that I found on, I think it was your website or whatever, that was looking at different shading engines for video games. And so that gives me great hope that whatever lighting engine Citybound ends up with will be really spectacularly good.
Yeah, it's something that's really important to me, and I think luckily I have some experience with computer graphics, and I think a little can go a long way. Interestingly, and like, okay, this is completely going off on a tangent now, but one of the things that annoys me the most about City Skylines is actually its drab colors, and they somehow manage to have realistic graphics, but which look really dark and weird for some reason.
Well, one of the categories of mod that City Skylines has, and like you can filter it under the Steam library, is color gradients. You can give it an LUT or a color sample, and it will recolor the whole game to look that way. And I agree, the base game does look pretty drab. It makes certain colors overly vibrant while making all your greens and your grays dull.
Yeah.
And I guess that makes somewhat of a cartoony look, which some people are into, and it matches the tilt focus vision of the game. But I mean, I use a very green LUT usually, which makes all of the nature really vibrant. You can see the big City Skylines YouTubers like, what's their name? Like Zad and Design Centric SimCity, whatever his face is, they use realistic LUTs, which brings out the whites and the vibrant light colors and stuff. And so, yeah, with those simple color gradients, you can turn what is a drab game into something that looks very realistic or very colorful, very vibrant.
Yeah, that's the perfect example for my point of a little goes a long way, where I think if you get the rough like light and shadow right in your base rendering and then use lookup tables or something similar to have really fine-grained and precise control over what color spectrum you're outputting, and you could vary that over time of day, for example, to really create different kinds of feelings, then I think you can create some very consistent and atmospheric looks. Cool.
And with increases in video card technology, especially RAM, like 2 years ago, the average RAM in a new video card would have been like 2 gigabytes. Now, every high-end card has 6, 8, 12, 16 gigabytes. And so you could really load up a lot of very high quality textures for everything in the game, from sands, gravel, brick, water textures. And so high quality textures is another thing that really we shouldn't be limited by anymore.
Yeah, not anymore.
And that's very to me.
Cool. Actually, a topic that we didn't really cover today, which maybe we can talk about next time, is gameplay and interaction design, because it's another kind of topic which I feel I only have vague ideas about, but which is probably the most important.
Yeah, because any like analysis thing you see on YouTube or the web or whatever, like the best games in the world are the ones where they sat down and tried to make a good game first, and
Exactly.
built a concept for characters, built whatever around that. And the biggest danger that you have is to try and make a cool city simulation engine and then try and mash gameplay into it until it sells.
Exactly. And what I'm most curious about is actually what could be a way of experimenting with that with the community that scales, where I get both direct and indirect feedback from actual players. But yeah, I will spend some more time thinking about it, and maybe we can discuss it next time.
Yeah. Again, well, as I've put you in the direction of, Prison Architect did a really good job of that.
Yeah.
So I know you ended up looking up some Prison Architect stuff. How much of that did you end up looking at? Did you play the game? Did you read up about it?
Before that, I watched probably several hours worth of Let's Play of Prison Architect. Actually, I really like watching Let's Plays because it allows you to step back and not feel like you are not the player, but you can observe the play, and I feel like it's really helpful to understand the what's actually happening with the game and the interaction. So I
and
have
it's also
a pretty
the best way to think about what you would do differently. I always yell at my Let's Players, do this instead, it's better.
Yeah, and so I feel like I got a pretty good impression of Prison Architect. When you prompted me to look at the detailed systems, this was actually, I didn't remember that it was you who did that, but this was actually my main inspiration for the simplified and now realistic economic model of giving people very simple needs that whose mechanics are very simple, but which can create very complex effects.
Because I had suspected in the original economics planning live stream that I was a part of that the prospects that you and other contributors were thinking about would be far too detailed and taxing on a system to properly run at the scale that you'd want in a city. Like you might be able to simulate a family or two, but if you're talking about 1 million residents, you have no hope. And you're not going to know the difference between a simplified version and a granular version on a city of that scale.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I actually, in a way, wasted 2 months on trying to make that complicated model work. And I learned a lot in the process. And one of the things that I understood was that I can actually achieve all of the very complex and interesting effects with a very simple system for each family underneath. And this is what I'm trying to build now. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I think Prison Architect did really well, and now that the game is finished and they are no longer developing it, the development team has moved on to a new concept, which actually looks really amazing right now. I'm really keen to see what they're going to do with it. But at the end of the day, it was a huge success. It won several game awards. I think it won a BAFTA. And to see how that all emerged, it came out of a very, very long and drawn out alpha process.
Yeah.
Where as soon as they had a working prototype, it was up on Steam, anyone could pay for it, and that funded the development, but it also meant that they were getting continual feedback from people. And so as soon as they had a capable prototype, they had a monthly feature release. I think it was the first of the month. Every month they'd come out with a new feature release with new mechanics and new menus and new systems and whatever. And they'd make a big half-hour YouTube video showing off all the different bits and all that sort of stuff. And it meant that they had constant user feedback on what needed to be improved gameplay-wise. And so over the 3 or 4 years it took them to build in all the systems that they wanted, they were able to polish the gameplay to something that would win awards.
Yeah, I think this is pretty much perfect inspiration also in this regard. And I didn't know that they actually followed such a strict process. I think I will do some more reading up on that and see what I can learn from it.
Yeah. So they have all of their monthly update videos on their YouTube page.
Yeah.
Where it was just the head game designer and the producer who sat down and did maybe a half-hour run-through of the game every month to show what it was doing.
Cool, I'll check that out.
And plenty of months it was like only 1 or 2 features, and they said, well, we were doing a lot of bug fixing this month or whatever. And that was cool. It just meant they showed off some community-made prisons instead.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
And this game will obviously have lots and lots and lots of systems. You're going to have pedestrians, you're going to have airports, you're going to have public transport, you're going to have schools and hospitals and parkland and beaches and national parks and all that sort of stuff. And so as soon as you have the economy prototype working, and as soon as you have the graphics to acceptable quality, it'd be great to get that out to as many eyes as possible, to get as many people to give you as much feedback on gameplay as possible to actually properly polish that. Because that's not something a one-on-one conversation could solve.
Exactly, and this is where I really hope to make use of the fact that there's a community existing, and I will definitely check out Prison Architect as a model for that. Cool, so thank you both, you Jesse and Inge, for joining.
Okay.
Thank you for all the people who watched. I hope this video will also be interesting for the people who will watch it later. I really enjoyed it, and see you maybe in 2 weeks, I hope. You can say bye. It's fine. Bye.
Bye.